What's up, guys? Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to Eat, Train, Prosper. This is the first episode of 2024. We have been on an approximate, 3-week hiatus. Bryan had some holiday travel. We had the actual holiday. And then, unfortunately, Bryan was sick last week, which he is going to tell us a little bit more about. But we're excited for what is, I believe, the start of our fourth year of the podcast. So for those of you who've been around for a very, very long time, thank you for just continued interest in the things that Bryan and I have to say. And for those of you who haven't been around for a while, thank you for being here as well and giving us a platform and an opportunity just to share things that are important to us and our inputs on them. Today, we're going to talk about quad training, right? So the third installment in our training series, I believe we've called it, and we're going to dive in. But before we get into that, as always, Bryan, can you kick us off with some updates, please?
Yeah, episode 140, man. This is pretty cool. Can't believe we've been doing this now for 3+ years. So really cool. But yeah, just trying to get into updates quick here. My kids are sleeping and my wife is out of town. So once the kids wake up, this episode's pretty much over. So yeah, we had Christmas travel. Basically, everyone was sick at some point. Ear infections, fevers, sister-in-law got COVID, the whole gamut of things. And I've been like low-grade sick for 3-ish weeks. On top of that, I read a book this break called Dopamine Nation. It's by Anna Lembke. She's a professor at Stanford University, so she works with Huberman there. And basically the premise of Dopamine Nation is that we're all addicted to these little things in our life. She uses examples like social media, the news cycle, pornography, or it could be illicit drugs of choice, whether, that's alcohol or some sort of other hard drug or softer drug. And so the big takeaway that I took from it for me personally was something that we've kind of discussed on this podcast throughout the time of its existence. Last January, I committed to not smoking marijuana for a number of months and instead just consuming it orally, I guess. That's not even the right word, eating it. And this year, after reading that book, I've decided to go 30 days, which is kind of the challenge presented in the book, to reset dopamine pathways. And so for anyone that doesn't know, dopamine is essentially the reward pathway in our brain that gives us these little pings of joy when things in life are meant to give us joy. And when you are addicted to your drug of choice, it doesn't have to be a drug you consume, but social media could be a drug or, news cycle, whatever it is. When we are addicted to these substances, they kind of reset our pain and pleasure tolerance in our brain. So the way she describes it is it's kind of like a seesaw, like a kid's seesaw, where there's like these pain gremlins on one side and there's these pleasure gremlins on the other side. And when you give yourself a bunch of pleasure, it's immediately going to be followed by some pain, which is the craving for more of it. Chocolate is a great example. Like for someone that likes chocolate, you eat chocolate, you're really excited. It tastes amazing in your mouth. And then as soon as the chocolate is gone, you are like, oh shit, I want more chocolate. And so the same thing can kind of be applied to any substance or any drug of choice, so to speak. And for me, I've been using marijuana recreationally or medicinally, however you want to look at it, for like 20 years, basically since college. And most days at night after my workday ends, it's something that I do to kind of help me relax, to watch a movie, to eat food, listen to music, whatever it is. It kind of provides me a little bit of that immediate pleasure. But after reading this book, it's made me question whether in some ways I'm numbing my body's natural ability to find pleasure in standard daily living. And so, yeah, I committed on January 1st to no longer consuming marijuana. And I think one of the biggest surprises for me is that there's this idea in the world that weed is somehow not addictive in the way that other substances are. And I was really floored and surprised to find out that there are legit physical withdrawal symptoms that I didn't expect, because everyone says it's psychologically addicting. You become dependent on it because you want it, but there's not actually going to be any like physical withdrawal symptoms. So it's affected me in a number of ways, but the two primary ones that I think I'll let you guys know about is sleep and appetite. And so the first couple nights after quitting, my sleep was extremely disrupted. I had a number of nights of hot sweats, cold sweats, chills, couldn't get my temperature right. The other impact has been dreams. So apparently marijuana suppresses your ability to get REM sleep, meaning you're not dreaming as fully as you could. And then there's this wild rebound effect when you stop, where dreams become extremely lucid and fall into the horror genre. And so I've been experiencing that as well, where just the most riddled anxiety and horrific dreams that wake me up in a panic multiple times a night. But my REM sleep has gone up to like 3 hours a night, which has been kind of insane. And then the other way it's affected me really deeply has been appetite. And so I've been fine on breakfast and lunch, because those ones I'm generally not consuming marijuana for anyways. But I've kind of been unable to eat dinner for about a week straight now. Last night was actually the first night that I was able to eat dinner and actually enjoy it without feeling like I was force feeding myself. And so I've been weak. I've lost 7 pounds in 8 days, which has been insane. I mean, I know a lot of that is glycogen and it's not actually pure weight loss. But I've been consuming probably an average of about 1,500 calories a day. Only one day have I even hit over 150 grams of protein, because I just haven't been able to eat enough. And so, yeah, I don't want to belabor this too much. I've already spent 5 minutes on it, but I just thought it was important to share that with you guys. And for anyone else that consumes, it was really, really surprising to me, the impact that it has. And this is all normal. In the last week, I've gone deep diving into PubMed research on marijuana withdrawal, as well as Reddit forums and stuff like that. And so this is all very standard and normal. And it really surprised me. I didn't expect it. So yeah, that's my update for now. And I will say in the last 2 days, I've felt significantly better and have had good energy and focus and motivation, and been sleeping much better and got my appetite back and all that. So it took about 6 or 7 days for that to correct. But yeah, just wanted to share that with you guys.
That is very, very cool. That I obviously saw the note in our document here, but I didn't know that is the angle that was going with. And it also reminded me that I had to check my phone really quickly, because I didn't remember the date. But by the time this episode comes out, I will be 4 years without alcohol. It's January 15th. And that kind of reminded me, I was like, oh yeah, that date is coming up where I quit drinking, I obviously didn't have the symptoms and stuff, because I wasn't really a regular partaker at that time. But I do think it's one of those very interesting things, and something that I have a little bit in my update as well about. You reach a point in your life where the anecdote of direct personal experience plays a significant, you put a lot of weight in it, right? Because you can read these studies, like marijuana doesn't have these, dependency things, but then like when you experience a lot of these things, whether that is purely, psychological or physiological, the side effects or the impacts of it still are real in nature. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, I mean, the studies actually show that it is, in fact, physically addictive, which I was surprised about, because I think the common sentiment among people that smoke is it's not physically addictive, that it's just psychologically addictive. And when you read the studies and you read the Reddit forums and stuff like that, everybody is experiencing the same things that I was experiencing. So it is, in fact, very physically addictive. And then I'll really quickly move through my last two updates here. So the impact on training the last couple weeks as a result of the sickness and the withdrawal and stuff like that has been that I just had completely lacked motivation and energy and focus to want to train. I've let my cardio completely fall off. I updated Mike T. Nelson, my coach, about what was happening. And ironically, he was actually just on the Mind Muscle Connection podcast, and they did a whole episode about cannabis. So I thought that was incredibly fortuitous timing, but or serendipitous, I guess. But I basically decided to nix the last week of my current training cycle and instead just kind of listen to my body, take it easy, skip the intense cardio, and mostly begin kind of experimenting with some of the training from my Intelligent Bro Split that's coming up. And so I've been kind of lightly going through a couple of those workouts, and that's been really fun. And then my last update is that I am going to hypertrophy camp at N1. This will be my first official trip back to N1 since, well, I've been going, casually to hang out with Cass and stuff, but my first official like seminar of sorts since we did the biomechanics practical in 2021, I think. And so I'm going in March with Jordan Lips, and we're going to hang out and do the hypertrophy camp together, which I am really excited about. So that is the end of my updates, and let's kick it over to you.
Yeah, so I'll keep mine short and sweet so we can dive into the episode. My diet has officially ended. I guess that was about 9 days ago at this point. The only changes we have made thus far is carbohydrate are up 125 grams per day from the low point of the diet. That may not seem like an exorbitant amount of increase. However, my carbs only got to 275, I think, at the low point of my diet. So I was quite fortunate in that regard. So now carbs are back at 400. Body weight still hasn't really started climbing yet. So I think we're just taking a slow kind of increase there. But training has been like numbers. I was still able to progress on many things through the end of the diet, which was very, very eye-opening for myself. But I'm now stacking like a rep or two on most exercises again this week, which has been very, very fun. I put up one quick post on my story this week. I do believe I have achieved what I had set out to achieve when I started that year-long goal with hiring Jackson at the beginning of 2023, which was a lifetime best physique. I feel very confident in that statement. And then lastly, I have learned so much about resiliency, the physiques, I really should say the body's ability to adapt to environments and how resilient the body really, really is. The note that I had said about you, Bryan, with like the personal anecdote and having direct personal experience with things, it can really kind of shift how you perceive some surface level information. I would say is my direct experience with dieting here, and especially how I will question things in the fitness and nutrition space moving forward, especially in advanced athletes.
Huh. Well, yeah, I'll look forward to kind of expanding on that maybe in future episodes, because that is an interesting topic. We can probably do a full episode on that. And I was going to say one more thing. Oh yeah, your physique, dude. I mean, that one picture you just posted was insane when you compared the end of your diet 2021 or 22 or whatever it was to the end of the diet 2023, early 24. That was, I mean, completely eye-opening. Like you were like flat and soft in the other one. And I don't think anyone would have thought that at the time. They would have been like, oh, you look great. Like, you're so jacked. And then you compare it to the one from current and you're just like etched and every single body part stands out. It's like you're a cartoon image compared to where you were a year ago. So huge props.
Yeah, thank you. It has been fun. And obviously the images are not a one-to-one because I just wasn't posing, I wasn't posing the same then, but both fasted, right? Both at probably 9 hours fasted from meals, those sorts of things. So it was pretty cool to see that.
Super cool. Well, should we jump into quads?
Let's jump into talking about quads. So what I want to kick it off with, and then I'll kick it over to you, Bryan, is the simple thing about quads and kind of the beauty in its simplicity is I know we did shoulders, and I think we did back were the two that we've done thus far.
Yep.
Those ones, because like the back and the shoulder itself are around the shoulder joint, right? The shoulder is arguably the most complex joint. The hip is very similar in its design. But with training quads, right, you can extend the knee and you can flex the hip, right? And it just makes things a little bit more simpler in its design. And I think it's important from our standpoint to the listener to kind of break things down to a little bit of the basics first so that you can understand, like, when I have a movement, I'm essentially going to be extending the knee and flexing the hip at some point, and that is really how I'm generating force, into those tissues. So I did just want to start with that.
Yeah, it's a really good point. At the shoulder joint, you can articulate a ton of different angles. And so, like, in back, you have the ability to come across the body and adduct the arm and therefore stretch the lat. In the shoulders, you can move through the entire range of motion from in front of your body to basically behind your body, working the different heads of the shoulder. But like you said, for the legs, pretty much everything for the quads is going to be in the sagittal plane, which is going to be straight forward and backward. We're not doing a ton of articulation to the sides. And so yeah, it does in some ways simplify training. But it's also complex because the quads are such big muscles, and there are in fact 4 of them, which is why it's called the quads. And so, yeah, I think that's an important place to start as we go through the design series. Kind of the way we've approached it in the prior, and I think we should do the same here, is how we would design a quad focused day for a full gym. If you have every machine that you could possibly want, and then we disseminate that down into what you would do if you have a pretty robust home gym, and then what you might do if you just had dumbbells and bands or something along those lines. And so as we kind of jump into the design of a quad day, you said extend the knee and flex and extend at the hip. So in reality, what we have is we have isolation quad movements, which would be something like a leg extension, and its variations that we can discuss. There are short overload options and lengthened overload options and stuff like that. And then you have different squat patterns. And so when I think about designing a quad day, I usually look at having 3 movements in that quad day. I think 3 is going to cover the majority of your bases, which would consist of a knee extension, a squat pattern bilateral movement, and a single leg squat pattern movement. What do you think about those? And do you have anything to add?
No, I mean, I think that those are your 3 pretty much basic patterns. Once we get into it, like, there are many times where I will add a second bilateral exercise, typically only 1 set, and it might be like a Widowmaker on the leg press, for example. But I mean, you pretty much covered it there. Those are the 3 patterns we can really target. Yeah.
Is there any reason specifically that you would choose a second bilateral movement versus just doing the Widowmaker on the same bilateral movement that you were doing initially?
I find, like, the Widowmaker on a leg press, as opposed to the hack squat, I'll use it more with, like, clients that I want to really test their, like, RIRs and stuff, who I feel like are not necessarily intentionally sandbagging, but like mentally limiting themselves a little bit. And then I make them send me form review videos on it. So I kind of use it as like a gut check sort of thing, but I'll also typically program it like later. Like, we might have the leg extension, like 2 sets of hack squat, and then do some hip hinging. And then it's like, we're going to wrap up with like that 1 set. And it's really, the goal is to challenge them mentally and find their kind of gauging of their own RIR, more so than like we need additional purposeful stimulus like into the quads.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. So one thing I think you and I agree on, and I'll just want to confirm this for the listeners, is that we generally like to arrange training in a short and then lengthened type exercise order, meaning that we would start with something like a leg extension in many cases, and then move into our lengthened overload bilateral squat pattern. Is that still something you align with? What are your thoughts there?
I would say if someone is older, right, and has a little bit more like miles on their joints and stuff, I'm always going to take that approach. If someone is maybe like younger, or we really just need to learn how to train harder a little bit, and their ability to execute isn't like that high, I might start them with a lengthened overload.
That's actually a really, really good point about training age. I always find myself, even when I'm on podcasts and stuff, I think I talk to people that I feel like are advanced intermediates or higher. And sometimes I need to remember to dial it back and remember that we have audience that isn't necessarily always advanced intermediate. So that's a really good point. I mean, when I used to train when I was younger and when I used to train clients when I was younger, I generally would start with the lengthened overload movement. And so I think that makes a lot of sense. One piece though that, I think is important to mention is that people will often say, why don't you start with the lengthen movement? Because then you can drive more mechanical tension into it. And I think that that's a bit of a misnomer because the muscle really only knows tension. And so if you start with a leg extension and therefore that means that you have to use slightly less weight on the bilateral movement, that doesn't mean that you're achieving less mechanical tension for that movement. As long as you're still taking that movement to failure or to whatever desired proximity to failure you want to go, then you're still driving that same amount of mechanical tension into the muscle itself, even if you're doing that with less total load.
I agree with that. My final addition to that, and then this is purely anecdotal, I find for myself, if I perform the leg extension first, and then I go into like a pendulum or a hack, I may lose a rep or two, of pure performance at a given load on like the pendulum or the hack. But if I do the opposite, my leg extension performance is significantly worse. Like I might not even be able to use the same weight worse.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree. And that's actually part of why I generally tend to prefer to go short movements than lengthened movements, because when you fatigue a muscle at the short position, which would be where it contracts, it still has plenty of force that it can use through the lengthened range. But when you fatigue a muscle through the lengthened range, it also fatigues the muscle at the short position. And so exactly as you said, if you did the leg extension second, you would compromise the amount of load you could use significantly more than if you did the leg extension first and then went into the bilateral squat pattern. So with that said, maybe we can start talking about the actual design of how we would go about approaching a day. And so for me, I'm going to start with the leg extension. And my go-to is usually to do 2 working sets on the leg extension. I do think there is acceptable variability in how you approach that, whether it's 1 set to 4 sets even, or 5 sets. Also, as far as whether you use intensity techniques and stuff like that on the leg extension. And I know you're a huge fan of using myo rep or rest pause sets, plus potentially forced reps if you have a partner with you and stuff like that. And so, I don't often, okay, let me backtrack for a second. I do use rest pause myo rep sets, and even will go into partials because I train alone. I don't have the ability to do forced reps. And so when I do that, though, it's a progression over time. So like week 1 of my cycle, I might just do 2 straight sets of leg extensions. But by the time I'm getting into week 4, 5, 6 of my mesocycle, that's where I start incorporating, myo rep sets, adding partials and stuff like that. And so the volume and the intensity of the leg extension are both ascending as the cycle goes on. And one, I think, important piece here is, how does that increase in intensity and volume on the leg extension then impact the second movement? So what I mean is, if you just did 2 sets of leg extensions and then you could use X amount of weight on the pendulum, let's say it's 100 pounds on the pendulum for 8 reps. If then you get into a subsequent week of training and you're doing more myo rep sets, you're doing partials, you're doing forced reps, whatever it is, do you then still expect to improve on the pendulum squat? Or do you look at that 100 times 8 and be like, hey, 100 times 8 is the same that I did the week before and the week before and the week before, but because I'm doing more on the leg extension beforehand, I don't necessarily expect to increase on the pendulum? Or are you still expecting to increase on the pendulum despite the increased workload on the leg extension?
Do you want my Aaron answer in how camp is, or do you want, what's the word, like a safe answer?
Both. I mean, give me both.
The safe answer is no. I think there is realistic expectation to not expect an increase on the second exercise, the pendulum. That is my realistic the answer I would give to the majority of my clients, that sort of thing. The camp mentality of strive for the absolute everything that you have to give, zero compromises, is you expect to beat each previous set every single session. Like, that is the mindset of it. If you told me a year ago, right, I would be like, that's just fucking silly, right? That can't happen, right? You've been dieting for 4 months. Like, that can't happen. I would have believed that. Unfortunately, I don't know the way. Like, I've just lived through it, right? And I was beating my pendulum squat sets in my 24th week of diet that I had established the week before I started the diet, when I was 27 pounds heavier at the peak of my gain. So like, I've experienced it. So now it's like, I'm having a hard time, I'm internally conflicted in things because I've done it, and I've seen it. So now I'm like, is it a mental limitation, or was that because I have beaten those records that when I shouldn't have, based on that. So I'm still a little bit, as the listeners, and you can probably tell, like, a little bit of internal turmoil, and still working through a lot of that, because it's been a lot of brand new experiences and a little bit of like realizing maybe I was wrong or limiting myself and those sorts of things there. So.
Yeah, no, that's really well said. And that's exactly what I expected you to say too. Because I do think that at some level it is a psychological barrier. And I think the environment that you have put yourself in over these last 24 weeks has been a huge contributor to that. So you just can't replicate the environment that you're in with that type of crew around you and the pressure to perform that exists every single day. So I do want to ask a little bit as we get into the pendulum hack squat stuff. But before we do, let's just kind of tie a bow on the leg extension. What does a standard part A leg extension day look like for you?
Right now, or I mean,
when you've been, like, in general, when you're program designing for yourself in camp and or for clients, what does part A leg extensions look like?
Yeah. So if I'm working with like a beginner or an early intermediate, I'm probably just going to have straight sets, a little bit more volume. I might do 4 sets on a leg extension. If I'm doing 4 sets, I will typically give 2 rep ranges. So I'll say, like, I want set 1 and set 2, maybe like 7 to 10 reps. And then we're going to back down load a little bit. Sets 3 and set 4, I want like 10 plus, right? I'll leave it a little bit more open-ended. For someone who's a little bit more like intermediate or advanced, I might do 3 sets and give them 3 ranges. So we'll do a little bit of like undulating periodization, and I'll have a very low, or not very low, but like sub 10, maybe a 10 to 12. And then I'll want like a 15 to 18 or something like that for that. And if it's someone where we're maybe a little bit shorter on time, or working on, if maybe they're coming from like a high volume kind of background, and what I typically do is it can be challenging with higher volume, because it's hard to just continue to progress on the high volume. So I like to kind of bring in intensity techniques that we can bring volume down a little bit, save some time, but we pay for it in proximity, in multiple repeated bouts of reps in close proximity to failure. So that's how I will typically program for more like, novice, a little bit more intermediate, and then maybe advanced, and then someone who's like coming from high volume.
Yeah. So when you're in training camp, and so we're now talking about the advanced person, are you guys using forced reps and partials and stuff like that on all of the 3 sets that you're doing, or is that being saved for that like 15 plus rep set?
Every single set now is to failure and assisted reps. Every single set, every single across the entire week.
Man, this really is throwing a wrench in the face of standard training for natural athletes. What I mean? Like it
is. And here's the thing. And this is like, it will be, Jackson will release this in the coming weeks once we wrap everything up, but he gets a lot of flack and pushback. That's like, that's all well and great for you guys that are on gear. And he's like, I present to you about to be 36-year-old Aaron. Right. And at first, because so much of it for a long time was just like me and Jackson training together, I just kind of like, I'm like, yeah, we train hard, but it's not crazy or anything like that. But then now like people are coming to visit and stuff, and some people will pop in and people are falling the fuck apart. And I'm like watching it and I'm like, oh, wow. Like I have adapted and I don't think I've really realized it. And something, and I know I kind of keep derailing the conversation, I apologize, is if you look at like the high level CrossFit athletes, right? They're doing insane workloads. And granted, because of the constantly varied nature and not, being able to adequately recover between repeated bouts on the same tissues and stuff, injury rates are higher and obviously complexity of movement. But you have these people who, let's say, aren't on gear, right? I won't speculate, but they have insane, adaptations and resiliency to like very high volumes and insane amounts and stuff. So there's like evidence of it in other places.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of making me think that there's like a fragility mindset kind of for natural athletes. Mm-hmm. They're just scared of pushing too hard. It almost reminds me of, we had the study that just came out that 52 sets was more beneficial than not 52 sets. And that's a bit of a misnomer too, because if you actually read the study, they didn't do 52 sets the whole time. They escalated from something like 22 to 52 over like a number of weeks. But it still really has thrown, like, a lot of natural guys are up in arms about this because they're just like, that can't work. Like if you actually train people, like that's not the way people train and blah, 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 and all that stuff. And fuck, I'm one of those people, man. I don't think that study is real either. But when you look at it, like, you can't argue with the data. So it does kind of make me kind of think about the fragility mindset a little bit. The last question I have on this before we move on to the bilateral squat is Brandon Kempter the only natural guy that's come through with you guys, or has there been other naturals that have come through as well?
Just me and Brandon.
Yeah. So everyone else that's been coming through with you guys has been on gear. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting. All right, cool. Well, let's jump into the next movement. So, a hack squat, pendulum squat, leg press, at some level, they're all like similar enough that I think any of them are fine based on what your equipment selection options are. If I really had to choose one, I think my order would go pendulum, hack squat. It would be like pendulum's 1A, hack squat is 1B, and then leg press would be 2. And the reason that I say that is I think strictly due to range of motion in the leg press. It's very hard to get that really deep squat with incredible knee flexion in a leg press that you can get in a pendulum or in a hack squat. What do you think about that?
I would say at a population level, yes, 100%. 85% of leg presses are dog shit in terms of their design for maximizing knee flexion. There are some really, really great designs out there, however, that circumvent this, right? Nebula, the Nebula leg press, arguably the greatest leg press of all time. It's the leg press that Ronnie Coleman put 1,600 pounds on or whatever he had on it. That one is on a 35-degree incline. So it's just a much more biomechanically, advantageous position to bring your heels to your butt cheeks and get great knee flexion. The technically also Rogue because they bought the design. Arsenal leg press that's in a lot of gyms now, as Arsenal is a big equipment manufacturer in the United States and putting stuff, worldwide. I use the Arsenal leg press here. Another 35-degree incline design. It's a bit, its depth is slightly limited by the stoppers, but it is a better leg press. But I would say yes, an overwhelming majority of leg presses are pretty shit, and you have to rig them up all sorts of way to get a good knee flexion out of them.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, well said. I don't think, though, that anyone listening needs to stress that they're not getting a sufficient quad stimulus if they're using a hack squat or a leg press instead of a pendulum. Like, while I do think the pendulum is maybe just a tad bit more biomechanically advantageous because of the arc that it operates on, I do think that with the right approach and necessary modifications potentially or foot placement, you can achieve almost as good results with a leg press or a hack squat. And then especially on a hack squat, like the Arsenal hack squat, I find to just be a piece of trash. Yeah. However, if you flatten out the foot plate and then you put yoga blocks underneath the shoulder pads so that you can add 3 to 4 inches of depth there, I actually think that changes the Arsenal hack squat into a pretty decent piece of equipment. So I don't know if you have any experience with that and your thoughts.
The gym here that we're training at has the Arsenal hack squat. The design is good, right? It's a good design, but there's 2 minor things that make it kind of shitty. The back pad isn't long enough so that your butt hangs off, and then you end up getting the flexion in the lower back. And if you're doing 6 reps, 8 reps, 10 reps, it's fine. But if you're pushing high reps, you start to get that nasty back pump because you're getting that flexion because your butt's off the pad. And then if you're using the yoga blocks, like that's only going to exacerbate that. So that's one. It's just make the fucking back pad longer. Very, very, easy modification. And the stoppers are set too high. It bottoms out way too low.
Well, that's why you have the yoga pads on there. But exactly. Yeah, I didn't even think about the low back piece. That's a good point.
Yeah, that is my main gripe with it.
Yeah. But there are plenty of hack squats out there that have great designs that don't bottom out and do have a longer back pad and stuff like that. I mean, like the GOAT being the Atlantis transformer hack that Cass designed. And so the great thing about the Atlantis transformer hack is that it can be a hack squat where you're fully laid back, or you can shift the back pad forward and it becomes a slightly more glute dominant hack squat pattern, which is similar to the hack press that I have in my basement. That's more at that kind of hip dominant angle. So there are plenty of hacks out there. We don't need to belabor the Arsenal hack specifically. It does seem that the Arsenal hack is everywhere. I mean, every gym that I go to and drop in, and granted, I don't drop into too many gyms, but call it 5 over the last year, 4 of them have had the Arsenal hack. So, I mean, that's a pretty decent sample size. And then you said it has it as well. So what does programming look like on that second movement, on the pendulum or the hack or whatever that movement is that comes after the leg extension? How is that looking for your training?
Yeah. So that is one that I'm typically going to program in more moderate or lower rep ranges. Nothing as low as like a 6, but maybe like an 8 to 12 or something like that. For my more advanced clients, one that I really like to use there is to borrow Dr. Mike Israel's Myo Rep Match technique. And I'll typically program that with 3 sets. And I'll say, this is a time where I'll put that likely before the leg extension. And I'll say, hey, I want set 1, you're fresh, warm up very, very well. We're going to establish a rep target and take this to pretty much a 1 RIR, and I'll give them a gap. Like I want 12 to 18 reps or something like that. And let's say we get 14 reps. That's our rep target. Sets 2 and set 3. We take as many, mini 3 to 4 breath rests as we need to accumulate, 14 reps again. That is one I really, really like for my more like intermediate plus to advanced clients that I'll program for.
Yeah, so just to kind of expand and explain what Myo Rep Match is, essentially what we would do is we would take a set that's say 12 reps and you would go to failure at 12 reps and then you would briefly rest. It's got to be somewhere between 10 and 30 seconds, something along those lines, or how long are your breaks in the Myo Match?
Well, if you're failing, are we talking about set 1 or set 2?
Well, so the Myo Match in general is, hey, you have a rep target and then you're going to achieve the same number of reps you just achieved, but you're going to do it through these like really short rest periods. So the way I would look at it, if it was me, is I do 12 reps, boom, I hit close to failure, whatever it is. And then I need to hit 12 reps again, but it would be, rest 20 to 30 seconds, hit 3, rest 20 to 30 seconds, hit 3, 20 to 30 seconds, hit 3, 20 to 30 seconds, hit 2, 20 to 30 seconds, 1. And then boom, that equals 3, 3, 3, 2, 1 equals 12. So I've matched my 12 reps by doing 12 reps again with these little mini breaks in there.
Yeah. I will we're splitting hairs here. I will program it as like a second set. So it's not like, hey, you just did your 12 reps on set 1, 5 breaths and go again. Like, no, take 3 minutes or something like that. And you're and typically set 2, you can complete in 2, maybe 3 mini sets. And then the set 3 will be 3, maybe 4. So I like it. So you still get a big chunk of like maybe 8 or 7 or something like that on the first effort.
So I think that's a bit different than the way Mike Israetel does it. I could be wrong, but from my understanding of it, his is like a 1 set that's like a 4-minute set, where it's more of the way that I described it, where you hit your 12 or 15 to failure, and then you have to hit 12 or 15 again, like immediately after, with only these really short rest periods in there. So interesting. Your way, I think I like better because I just, what?
Said it's less hell.
It's less hell. I wonder if that, or Mike would argue that it's less beneficial then. I don't exactly know. I mean, my bias is to do it more your way because it's less hell and you're still getting like the reps in there. I guess in your way, you're getting fewer reps close to failure. It would be interesting to look at that from like an effective reps perspective, because I do think you'd get more effective reps Mike's way, but I don't know that really matters. Like you said, you're kind of splitting hairs.
And if you're, we're splitting hairs, but my concern would be like if we're on a hack squat or something like that, odds of failure go way up doing it that way. Or if you're chopping out like 2 or 3, like you misgroove a rep, and that's a 0 real fast.
Which isn't the end of the world though, because these machines are all going to bottom out to a point where you're not going to get like crushed and demolished by it. Yeah, cool. Well, so I don't often program that way. I think this is your training experience, your camp training experience has really kind of shifted the intensity meter one way in the way that you go and implement this stuff for the advanced athlete. So I think I fall a little bit more in that, I don't know what the right word I'm looking for is, but slightly less intense approach. So my usual approach is, like usual, to increase effort week to week. So I may start the cycle with the pendulum squat or hack squat at, 3 or 4 reps from failure. And then each week working progressively closer so that by the last few weeks of the cycle, I'm hitting failure. And then I'll usually add 1 or maybe 2 like myo rep or rest pause sets in at the end. And it's interesting because, soreness we don't use as this incredible proxy of, you have to get sore or you don't need to get sore or whatever. It's just kind of like this thing that exists. But I know that the way that I do it, I get plenty sore the way I do it. Like when I'm at 3 to 4 RIR in week 1, I get sore. And when I'm at week 6 and I'm doing a myo rep set and I'm at failure, I get similar soreness to how I did in week 1. And so I think a lot of that is attributable to the repeated bout effect. But it does make me wonder if I could adapt and that the repeated bout effect would also take place the way that you do it. So maybe I would be like fucking miserably sore the first week doing it your way, but eventually over the course of a few weeks, the soreness would kind of just level out and it would just be what it is, and it wouldn't be this crazy groundbreaking soreness that cripples me for 5 days. So it is interesting, the repeated bout effect really is this weird, odd thing that exists. And I find myself talking to it a lot with people in my Paragon group or Evolved or anything like that, because people are often scared of getting too sore, especially with things like lunges and RDLs and stuff like that. But as you do them more over time, your body does have this resiliency and it does adapt. So that's interesting. I may consider adding additional intensity there over the course of the next few months. Yeah. So I think we've kind of crushed the second movement. And so then we move on to a third movement. I know you mentioned that you often like to have that kind of shit test set where you have someone go into a leg press. So what does that shit test set look like on the leg press?
Yeah. So really quickly before we move into this, there's a reason why Bryan and I picked like the pendulum squat and the hack squat instead of something maybe like a Rogers Squat Pro or like a Smith machine squat. And the reason there is your back is supported, right? So that you can not shift your hips back to put yourself in a more mechanically advantageous position to move the load with like your glutes and hips. With a hack squat and in a pendulum, your back position is fixed against the back pad so that you cannot shift in there. So that is, because we're speaking about the quads and prioritizing them, like that is the precise reasoning why.
Yeah. And then I just want to, one more thing that you made me think of as you were talking there is one thing you see a lot on the internet. And I even see this in Mike Israel's videos, and it drives me insane, is people get to the bottom of the squat and they have the entire knees and hips shift back. So it's like you're going down, your knees are driving forward, and then you're just not set up properly, or you're going too low or something, but the knees shift back and you actually decrease the angle at the knee, which is the complete opposite of what you want to do if you're trying to train quads. And so the other day, Israel posted a video of his like cyborg technique person of the week, which is like his person who has the best technique from his training program. And this person literally was doing this. Like they got to the bottom of the squat and everything shifted back. So they were in incredible knee flexion. The knees were pushed forward and then they kept going. And by the time they got to the bottom, their shins were almost vertical again. And I just want to point out that I think that that's wrong. And it's not to say that we are splitting hairs. Like you're still going to get great gains if your knees shift back. It's not the end of the world. But in this pursuit of optimization, you want to set up these squat movements in such a manner that the bottom of your movement is also the point where your knees are the most forward. And if you're letting that knee shift back and the hip shift under, then you're diminishing the ultimate stretch that you can achieve on the quad at the bottom of the rep. And so that's just something that kind of bugs me that I wanted to touch on.
You find that in a lot of the hack squat designs that are like in some older gyms by like Precor in a Carrion, where there's a gap between the floor and the foot platform.
Foot plate.
Like if you have a poorly designed hack squat, it's going to force that to happen once you get deep enough. So if anyone has any questions about that, just like DM us and we'll send you an example.
Yeah. All right. So talk to me about this gut check set on the leg press.
Yeah. So it's really like a time saver thing. I like to do, it's one set. It's something I took from Dante Trudel called Widowmakers, 20 rep, one set, 20 reps on the leg press. And the reason I like it on the leg press is a little bit different from like a pendulum squat or a hack squat, where you can't really lose the set by losing like your core brace because you're kind of seated, so it's a little bit easier there. You can load up a lot more than you would think. And the reason I like doing this is I have clients, especially like if I have like a client coming from like a powerlifting background, I'll use this for them. Or someone who I know is just not pushing themselves hard enough. I'm like, pick a load. I want, and you're going to film it, right? I want 20 reps, but I want those 20 reps to be like, you're about to fail, max 1-2 RIR there. People do like 32, 33 reps. And I'm like, okay, right. I want you to put an extra plate on each side next week, sort of thing. And it's not like you get a great stimulus out of it, good, like quads, hips, the whole thing, but it's really like, it's a very simple exercise to show people how grand their limiting beliefs are. Right. And it's like, you have so much more in there. Like, and then I use that for them to dial it in. And then I'm like, now once we get to like where we're actually pushing ourselves, let's say we get 17. I'm like, great. Next week we're shooting for 18, 19 or 20. And then we bump load. And it really challenges people. Even like some of my more, what I would consider like advanced clients, like they are really, really challenged by it. And they get a healthy amount of anxiety about performing it. But I really, really love just what it challenges more so the quads though, or more so than the quads, just the mental side of things.
Cool. No, I dig that. I think that's a great tool, especially for someone at like that intermediate stage that isn't 100% sure how to push themselves. So do you guys use that in training camp? Is that something you generally do? Like, do you have a fourth movement in there? Like we talked about the 3 main movements. Do you then go from pendulum or hack to leg press?
We only have the leg press once in our 12-day cycle, and it is first in the rotation.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, I don't want to belabor that too much. I think we can jump on to what would be the third movement in my program design for quads, which would be the single leg movement. And so I think there's a lot of choices you can select from here. It can be like a split squat of some sort, dumbbell split squat, rear foot elevated, front foot elevated, wedge, whatever. I find myself often using the B stance pendulum. And it's different enough than the standard pendulum that I think that there's a bunch of utility there. But to be honest, when I program the B stance pendulum, I'm usually doing that in a cycle where my second movement is a hack. And if I'm using the pendulum as my second movement, then I'll usually make the single leg movement a split squat. So there's kind of two approaches that I'll take to program design there. This current cycle that I'm doing for my intelligent bro split that starts in mid-January, I'm actually using the hack as the number 2 movement, the B stance pendulum as the number 3 movement, and then I have a finisher. And the finisher is something that I don't generally use when I'm doing a 2 times a week per body part approach. But because this intelligent bro split only has me training quads once a week, I do have this finisher. And so what I'm doing here is just one set of a sissy squat, which is a lengthened overload for the rec fem. So it's basically attacking the same area that we attacked first with the leg extension, but instead of doing it short overload like a leg extension is, it's the lengthened overload. So it's a sissy squat, the hips stay open, it's bottom range of motion. So I don't even come up all the way. I'm keeping full tension on the quad the entire time. And then I superset that with walking lunges. And that is just an absolute soul crusher. I did it for the first time yesterday at 3 to 4 RIR each, just to kind of test it out and see what it felt like. And even just from one set of 3 to 4 RIR each, I hit 8 sissy squats, and then I went into 8 walking lunges, 4 per leg. And my heart rate was like 175 and I was destroyed. So that's the way that I'm going about programming my quad day right now. How about you, as you jump into your single leg movement? What do you like to do, and what does the rep scheme and stuff look like?
Yeah, so with my single leg movements, because they are unilateral and we're doing both sides, I do try and keep the reps more moderate. I'll typically say like a 7 to 11 sort of thing, and unless you have it misloaded. One of my favorites, personally, is still the Bulgarian split squat. I'll use that with some clients as well. A front foot elevated, like reverse lunge in the Smith machine is another one that I'll use. Front foot elevated supported reverse lunge with a dumbbell is another one I really, really like. As much as I love the front foot wedge, rear foot elevated split squat and some of the N1 stuff, I don't typically use it that much with clients, mostly due to the setup time and how long it takes to like really perfect. That took me fucking weeks, and I felt like a moron, you know what I mean? And I literally had the people who created it hands-on teaching it to me. And I'm like, I can barely do it myself, let alone try and teach someone else how to do it through the fucking internet. You know what I mean? Yeah. That's one that I typically don't use that much. Walking lunges, sometimes if someone is in a gym that has a good space to do it, but I'm not going to have someone in a regular 24, walking around through the benches and stuff doing walking lunges. So that's one thing, is I try and be really pragmatic with what the gym looks like. And I typically will have clients give me a video walkthrough of the gym so I see what's in there and those sorts of things. So I don't program anything that's just asking something of them that I would never do myself, really.
So what is your rep scheme? Like you said, 7 to 10. Is it 1 set, 2 sets, 3 sets per leg? What are you doing?
Rarely do I do 3 sets of the unilateral. I feel like from a time efficiency standpoint, the trade-off is quite hard, or gets quite high there. Typically, if I were to do 1, I would have an intensity technique or something, but that's not something I'm typically putting intensity techniques in with a balance component or something like that. So typically 2, I would say, is most often what I program there.
For me, I would also do 2 if I was just doing the single leg movement, but because I have that finisher with the sissy squat to lunge, I'm doing 1 set of the single leg movement, and then I'm doing 1 set of the sissy squat to lunge. So in reality, I guess I have 5 movements, because I have the leg extension, the hack squat, the B stance pendulum, the sissy squat, and then superset with the walking lunge. So I have 5 movements in there, but it's 4 sections. And then the last 2 sections are just 1 set each. So that's pretty much what my quad day looks like. And then we are running short on time. So I kind of propose that we lump home gym and dumbbell only into one section and just kind of cover those really quickly. Yeah. I'll go over my selections, and then you can let me know if I missed anything or if you want to clean anything up there. Cool. So for home gym to replace the leg extension, unfortunately, there's just not great options to replace leg extensions at home. The one that we have found through years and years of, we have a home gym program and a dumbbell program at Paragon and Evolved. So there's a movement that we call the sissy banded leg extension. And maybe we can put a link to a video for that movement in here so people can check that out. You can also just YouTube sissy /banded leg extension. And we have that video in our library at Paragon. But essentially what you do is you tie a band to a pole in front of you and you loop the band around the back of your calves or back of your knees. And then you kind of lean forward into a sissy squat and put your hands on the pole where the band is tied, if you can visualize that. And then what you're getting there is you're getting a bit of the sissy squat because you're getting onto your toes and you're driving your knees forward, but you're also getting the resistance of the band as you then push back away from the pole. So you're getting a bit of a short overload through the band resistance. And that's really what we found to be the most specific swap for leg extensions. In the past, we've used straight up banded leg extensions where you can attach a band underneath a bench and essentially extend your leg with the band around your ankles. That one, it's tough to progress, but it works. We've done dumbbell leg extensions where you pinch a dumbbell between your feet and do that. But that's also hard to balance and hard to progress. And you reach a point where it's just a difficult movement. So we've kind of found ourselves using the sissy banded leg extension as the best sub. You can increase band tension. You can stand further away from the pole. So there's a few different ways that you can increase resistance there. And then that movement works for both our home gym programs and our dumbbell programs. In replacement for the hack squat or the pendulum squat or the leg press, we use one of two movements. We'll either use a heels elevated back squat if you're in a home gym. And if you don't have a barbell and you're in a dumbbell program, we use the foam roller hack squat. And to be honest, I think both of those movements are fantastic, especially the foam roller hack squat. It provides you that back support that we were talking about is so important, which is why we choose the bent pendulum or the hack squat. Whereas the back squat doesn't give you that back support the same way that the foam roller hack squat does. And so I think both of those movements are great and we'll often use them interchangeably in the home gym program. But when you're in the dumbbell program, you really just have the foam roller hack squat. There aren't too many other options that you can use there to emulate like a really solid bilateral squat pattern. You'll hear people sometimes be like, oh yeah, heels elevated goblet squats or some silliness like that. But you're really very limited by how much load you can use in a heels elevated goblet squat because you have to pick the weight up and then you have to support it in the front rack. So I don't know about you guys, but I can front squat like 250 pounds for reps. I'm not picking up a 250 pound dumbbell and then trying to squat that. So you are a bit limited there. And so I'm not a huge fan of using that as a primary movement, although I will use the heels elevated goblet squat as like a finishing movement sometimes. Like one of my favorites finishers for home gym is to go sissy squat into like superset with heels elevated goblet squat, or to go walking lunge into heels elevated goblet squat. So that one's really great because you can tire yourself out with the walking lunge and then you just drop one of the dumbbells, pick up the other one and start heels elevating goblet squat. So that's a great option too. And then for the third movement, there really isn't a change. Like, no, you can't do a B stance pendulum squat, but you can certainly do a Bulgarian or a front foot elevated split squat or something along those lines. So yeah, I think that's pretty much a decent summary of the options there for the home gym. Any thoughts?
The only thing I will add there, and I know in the shoulder episode, we kind of interchanged home gym with like a functional training facility or a CrossFit gym. Mm-hmm. This is less likely to have in your home gym, but more likely to have in the CrossFit or functional training facility, a sled for you to perform reverse sled drags for a replacement of the leg extension, which allows you to train terminal knee extension, and you can load it up pretty good there. So that's like a one kind of asterisk caveat one that maybe, might help someone out there.
Yeah, no, I love that. It's a great idea. I never even really considered that. Cool. Well, that's pretty much it, man. I think we can tie a bow on this one.
let's tie a bow on this one. Hopefully this has been very, very informative. Like this episode, especially around quads, my quads are still my lagging body part. They're getting better, but this would have been so helpful for me like 6 years ago. So hopefully it's been helpful for someone out there. If there's anything that we touched on that was a little bit hard to just grasp from just seeing our faces or even just voices, feel free to ping either one of us and we'll send you some videos or something like that to hopefully help you out there.
Sounds good.
As always, guys, thank you for listening. Bryan and I will talk to you next week. It will actually be next week too, I think, not in 3 weeks.